France has had it very, very easy so far. Can you imagine? And that is the only country in the world that just sits back and money flowing into its treasury, money which it has not worked for, it has not earned, money being plundered and looted from its former colonial territories.
Thanks for joining Esteem Television, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Augustine Nambe. My guest today is Professor Carlson Anyangwe. And Professor, I'm going to bring you right away, saying Happy New Year, because I think this is the first time I'm seeing you this year.
True.
And talking about the new year, I want to start this. I have a few things I want to discuss with you. I think the main one that I want to talk with you today is about, I had an interview with the Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, Thibault Nage. In that interview, I think the one thing that stood out was a statement that he made that geopolitics trumps legality. And I've been thinking about that, and that's the one statement that a lot of people who watch that interview have paid attention to. So I want to come back to that and discuss it a little more with you. And I really want to do it because you're one of the legal minds in our struggle. And Southern Cameroon, as a country that cannot be projecting geopolitics and has based its arguments for its freedom on the legalities and the process which they obeyed faithfully, but were disappointed by it. I just thought I should take this moment or have you to discuss this. But before I go there, so I just want to ask you a few other things that have been happening in the territory. I just want to get a reaction from you about the assassination of Honorable Kemende.
Well, I mean, my view is that as far as French Cameroon is concerned, the barrister, even though is one of their lawmakers, is expendable. And every single Ambazonian there is also expendable. Everyone notices that French Cameroon has not uttered a word ever since they ordered the assassination. Now, of course, we don't expect them to say anything because they ordered the assassination. And the evidence is quite clear. If they did not, they would have done even as a polite thing to express shock and extend condolences to the family. But that they didn't do so, to me, suggests very clearly that they ordered the assassination of one of their own lawmakers. This is the interesting thing about it.
Do you think they may have done that privately? They may have expressed the shock and the condolence privately and you don't know about it?
No, it's common knowledge how they operate. We know they have a network of assassins that prowl around and then eliminate their opponents. This is not something that is just happening today. It has been the culture in French Cameroon, the way they operate, the way they function. Like people are talking about torture. Torture did not start today. They didn't start torturing our people today. Way back in the 60s. That was the norm. And that's how that system in that country has always operated. It's just that now there's more exposure because of the development, the communication technology that has developed. And therefore, we're quick to have these things very, very quickly, instantly, and so on. But this is a system. They've been doing this for a long time. And that's why you see them, they show no remorse at all. And I don't think, and I don't believe, they ever show any remorse. That is how they function. That is how they operate. Eliminating people, eliminating perceived opponents, people who disagree with them, even just at the intellectual level. They just systematically eliminate them. So this is their modus, so to speak.
Well, how does that make you feel even about your own safety? So do you feel, is that a place you can visit anymore?
I laugh because, yes, I can visit it, taking the risk, knowing that, of course, there's no doubt that they will do that to me. But you see, look, there's one thing I believe in. If it's a day, it's a day. Some people talk about destiny. If your destiny is your destiny, if not your destiny, it's not going to happen. When they jailed people like Mandela, of course, everybody cried and shouted and so on and so on. But that was not his destiny. He was not meant to stay in jail. Eventually came out and to rule his country. So what is yours will be yours, irrespective of the forces that are harnessed and directed towards you. So even if I were to go there today, I mean, whatever they do must be accepted as something that is bound to happen. If it's not bound to happen, if not going to happen, it won't happen. Try as they can. That is my approach to the situation in which we find ourselves.
Now, have you been following what has been going on in Mali and Senegal and the Guineas and Burkina Faso? Have you been following all of that?
Yes, I have. And this is a wonderful awakening in Francophone African countries against France. France has had it very, very easy so far. Can you imagine? And that is the only country in the world that just sits back and money flowing into its treasury, money which it has not worked for, it has not earned, money being plundered and looted from its former colonial territories. And for me, the sad thing is that the Western world, the big powers, Britain, America, and all these countries, they have kind of conceded that these territories belong to France, and France is free to do whatever they want to do with those territories. Unfortunately, there's a wind that is blowing at the moment, and there is reawakening. And that reawakening is not only amongst the military ranks, but also the population of Francophone African countries. I've followed some of the discussion that's been going on. I've followed some of the comments on Twitter, some of the comments on Facebook, and so on. There is that great awakening. And France must know that its days in Africa, free ride in Africa, is going to be over very, very soon.
Yes, I think some of those commentaries you're talking about is not only with on Twitter, but also in France. I think I've been hearing some surprising, favorable comments for Africa, even in the French Parliament now. I don't know if you've heard some of those sound bites.
Yes, I followed very closely, especially the submission by Mr. Nado, who was an MP. Very, very forthright. Don't mince his word. And I think there was also another MP who said very clearly that France has become a disgrace, complete disgrace. Macron has made France now a big laughing stock all over, treating Africans as if they are slaves, treating African countries as if they're their backyard, their boys they give instructions to, turn left, they turn left, turn right, they turn right, go forward, they go forward, no, stop, they stop, and so on. And this is what is happening. France, arguably, is the only former colonial power that has so many troops on African soil. Why? They claim they're fighting terrorism, but we know why. France, of course, we know, does not produce. I've been to Europe several times. Go to any shop. I've not heard anyone asking for French products. No. First of all, they're very poor, very they don't sell out of France. And so the only place where France dumped them in their former colonies. That's the only place where they dumped them. And where people go and buy those things and make a lot of noise about it. But also France is eager to provide employment to its unemployed. So it sends the military out. So go out. In that way, you have encampment of French military all over the former French-speaking African countries. And that way, you have the so-called French, what they call the coopérants or whatever name they call them, that are, these are fly-by-midnight specialists and who have knowledge, and they come and they go straight to all these, the presidency of these Francophone African countries, and purport to be able to provide them with some expertise, which they themselves know they don't have. Expertise which they themselves know is not comparative anywhere else in the world. Have you ever asked yourself, why has France never gone to Asia? Why has it never gone to Latin America? The only place they rush to is Africa. Why? Because for them, Africans are stupid. Africans are asses. They will never stand up against them. So they always come to Africa. They loot, they plunder the resources. When I saw pictures, talking about Mali, when I saw pictures of the French military looting the gold from Mali, I said, this is it. This is it. How else can it? Not, France, in fact, more, come to think of it, is acting like a highway robber. It's a brigand. And so when you talk about France fighting terrorism, I wonder what that is. Whereas they themselves are actually operating on the same level, on the same lines as any terrorist organization. And the fact that France is a state doesn't change anything. States can also be terrorist states. We know that.
I think Ambazonians have called La République du Cameroon a terrorist state in Ambazonia because they act exactly the same. So.
Indeed. French Cameroon is a terrorist state. By every single definition you want to use, they are a terrorist state.
So do you think this wind of change that is sweeping West Africa now will come to Central Africa or La République du Cameroon?
Look, there's a big gulf between French-speaking West African countries. They are much more, use the French term, évolué. They are much more knowledgeable. They have more finesse. They're more educated than the militaries in what do you call them, French Equatorial Africa, and that's why I even see the parity of the colonial franc is not the same. The one in West Africa is stronger than the one in French Equatorial Africa, and the one in West Africa, if you go to West Africa, you give this thing in Equatorial Africa, they don't accept it because, as far as they are concerned, even France itself knows that French Equatorial Africa is on a lower level. And so their militaries are not as capable as the militaries in French West African countries. You take a country like Cameroon, people say military take over. Who will then govern if they take over? Do you see anybody in the ranks there who can govern? There's not one single one of them. First of all, because their knowledge of these things is extremely limited. And I don't see them taking part in governing. And yet, you find in West Africa, military officers, just at the rank of colonel, they take over and they manage to run the country, But you can't see that in French Equatorial Africa. It doesn't happen at all. It wouldn't happen.
Yeah, I was talking to someone and he was saying that the military in La République du Cameroon is eating fat. That's the word he used. So it looks like they're part of the establishment. They're not really... well, I guess in all Francophone Africa, the armies are trained by the French. So I'm really listening to what you're saying because all these troops in all Francophone countries are trained by the French, but in West Africa, they're obviously not behaving the way they are in Central Africa.
That's true, but what is the entry point for that training? What is the entry point? And what is the exposure after you've gotten that training?
Yeah.
Most Francophone countries, French Cameroon included, it's at a very close society, very, very close. There are certain kinds of literature you're not allowed to read, especially if you're an establishment, say the military. You're not allowed to read any kind of literature. So they're much more closer. There is a close society. And the militaries are trained only to do what they consider to be military. You don't go out of that box. If you try to do that, then of course you know what will happen. They're not even allowed even to link up with other sectors in the community. That is not part of it. Whereas you have in West African armies, those guys, they may well be receiving training from France, but the entry point is not the same. And even when they come back, they are much more exposed. They interact with community, with the people, and so on and so forth, than you have in Central Africa, French Equatorial Africa. And I insist on calling them French Equatorial Africa because they still remain essentially French Equatorial Africa up to this date. So that is a big, big difference. That's a big difference. I've watched the pictures in Mali, Burkina Faso, all these countries. When the military take over, the reception they get from the population is very, very wonderful. So they know their population knows them and trusts them to be able to do certain things. But I bet if that were to happen in any French Equatorial African country, the military will parade around the street and shooting at it because they know the civilians will come to oppose them to shoot at them. So it's not the same thing. It's not the same. If you look at it very, very carefully, it's not the same thing.
Yeah, as you talk, I've been thinking that you're actually correct because Sankara came from Burkina Faso.
Yep.
Long ago. So it's not something I was going to say that there has been an evolution since Ivory Coast because the army in Ivory Coast obviously obeyed the French and overthrew their legal president, Gbagbo, and then installed the French president. Yes. But since then, you can even hear in Mali and in Senegal, they are mentioning that what happened in Ivory Coast will not happen in Mali. And I hear voices from Senegal warning everybody, all the Francophone presidents, that if they join to attack Mali the way they did to attack Ivory Coast in 2011, 2010, they will have no presidency to come back to. So that is really a revolution. Now, how do we explain what is happening in Central Africa, though?
No, the Central Africa, they again, the French overplayed their hand. Yeah. Here is Central African Republic, mixed up with all the different groups, and France tries to exacerbate the situation by trying to pit what they call the Christians against what they call the Northerners, the Muslims. These are people who live together for how long? You've never had all that kind of thing on religious lines. Then all of a sudden, they start saying, Muslims versus the Christians, and therefore, if in this day and age, when the Western world is trying to equate Muslims to terrorism, that's what they're trying to project. And so therefore the French injected themselves in there that they want to fight terrorism, which actually meant they want to fight those from the northern part of Central African Republic. It wasn't as straightforward as that, because these people know themselves, they know each other very well. And so instead of France deferring to the government, which is in place and so on, they purported to provide the lead. We are going to fight terrorism on your behalf. We'll do this and so on and so forth. But we know that in the process, France simply secured the area where you have the diamonds, have all the resources. That's what they always do. They are made to secure those places, and the French were simply looting. I went to Central African Republic, Bangui, a couple of years back. First, I was shocked at what I saw to be an airport. I said, what? If this is an airport in South African Republic in this day and age now, in 2000, that must have been 2015 or 16, if that is the airport, what was the airport in the time of Emperor Bokassa? I just don't figure out. I mean, our Tico compared so many times far, far better than that one. And then as you leave that airport, in fact, as you land and you see the deployment of French troops here, there, and so on, they have actually taken off those areas, cordon them off. No-go areas for the French, for the government of Central African Republic. Can you imagine a foreign power comes to a country, cordon off certain power and say you cannot go there? What was the pretext? They claimed they are fighting terrorism. But in actual fact, and people were pointing out to me there at the airport, all these big aircraft from France, loading things into it. About 2-3 flights a day. What is it that we're doing? I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing. Central African Republic just going backwards and backwards and backwards and backwards, and the new leadership said, at this rate, we'll go back to the Middle Ages. And so they had to seek assistance from outside, some alternative assistance. And that's how the Russians are able to elbow the French out of that place.
Yeah, Prof, as you've been talking, I've also been thinking, it's really ironic that when you ask an African to talk about some of the problems in Africa, they mostly talk about the foreign forces, especially the French. But when you listen to the reports about Mali from the BBC, they never mention any foreign power. They never mention the French. Have you? I don't know if you've been listening to what the BBC has been saying and been wondering, come on, what are you talking about?
No, remember the BBC is his master's voice. The policy is a total government line. It's an instrument of foreign policy by the British government. And they will not say so because the British themselves are doing exactly the same thing. Just in Cameroon, the British have boots on the ground. They supply military equipment and they supply training and whatever to a regime they know is genocidal, has gone out and is killing people, destroying a part, the Ambazonian, which was part of a British trusteeship. And the British so far have not lifted a finger. Instead, they are stoking the fires. Why? Because Britain now finds itself in a very difficult situation since it left Europe. And so it's looking for resources everywhere. And so the little thing which French Cameroon gives them, and I saw something like 200 million, which the British are hanging on to be able to do all of these things. But interestingly, the resources which the British are looting don't even come from French Cameroon. They come from a former British trust territory of the Southern Cameroons. Yeah, so the BBC will not talk about that because they themselves, the British themselves, are around the continent as well. I'll give you just one example. Do you know how many powers are in small little Djibouti? Djibouti is smaller than Fako. Just Djibouti. The Americans are there, the Brits are there, the Chinese are there, the Japs are there, the German. About 6 powers have military bases in that small little place.
Yes.
I mean, it's amazing. It's amazing, you know? So Africa become once more, people say the Cold War is over, become now a playground now for all these powers, testing their military, testing their strength, testing their powers, and doing all kinds of things. It's unfortunate. This is what is really happening. But African leadership is quiet. The AU, which is supposed to spearhead some of the things we're talking about, and say no. Instead, the AU is complicit in every respect. Ever since that Chadian took over as what I was calling the chairperson of the commission, the AU has just gone down. They will not go and try this in America, where they have a similar organization American states. They will not go and try that there, or ASEAN, Southeast Asian countries. The only playground is Africa, because we've tested and known that our leadership is extremely poor, beggarly. We become beggars. The AU, the African state cannot even prop their own organization, can't even fund it. Funding has to come from foreign countries. And of course, he who pays the piper, they say, dictates the tune.
Yes, and I was looking that up, and 75% of the AU's budget comes from the EU.
Yeah. My God, if my West closed that AU, it serves no purpose then. For what? I mean, if Africans set up an organization and they can't fund it, why then do you set up an organization? Why? I mean, I will just close the damn thing, and as they say, everyone for himself, God for us all, and the devil will take the hindmost.
Absolutely, and Prof. So this is a very good background to what Ambassador Thibault Nash talked about, because what he was really talking, he was just describing what is. He was not saying it should. He was not saying geopolitics should trump legality. He was saying that is what is. And then he also gave an example of of his own home country, Hungary. That it was broken up during the First World War by the Allies because they felt it was too big and threatening to them, so they break it up. And so, but that is a fact which I don't think can be accepted. But I think I learned the word Westphalia Treaty from you.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Yes, about how in Europe, what is happening in Africa will not happen in Europe, because even smaller states are well protected and individuals are protected. But it seems to me that legality only takes place within the boundaries of the West, and outside of there, then geopolitics now trumps legality. And I think that's what Ambassador Thibault Nash was stating. But I don't think we can accept that to be the norm. And I want to read a response that you gave, which really was what brought me here to invite you to come and say it a little, explain it a little more, because Ambazonia is one of those countries that followed all the laws, obeyed the Germans, they obeyed the League of Nations, they obeyed the British, they obeyed the UN, they even obeyed La République du Cameroon, and look at where they end up. And so I really want you, because we cannot accept that legality is not as important as geopolitics. And I just want to give a little bit of what you wrote. You said, he says legality does not trump geopolitical realities. I am not sure I know what his concept of geopolitical reality is, but taking the thesis at face value, it would be a recipe for world chaos. I would let you then proceed with the chaos, because you talked about there will be no, you said there will be no international law, there will be no rule of law, no law of UN binding resolutions, no treaty laws, no human rights laws, no law of the sea, no law of self-determination, African treaty principle of intangibility of boundaries as of independence will not work. So help us understand that. And I really brought you because our lawyers have educated us very well about the legalities of Ambazonia to be an independent country and not be thrown into a very brutal colonization than the territory has ever experienced before.
Yeah, I think like lawyers do, when you start any discourse, you start by understanding on defining terms. And when you started, I think you clarified a bit of the thought of Ambassador Nash. Let me hasten to say that the example he gave will not have been a very good example in the present context. He's talking about a World War I situation. After the Second World War, it was a new world order that came into place based on the rule of law. In other words, the system which we have now, the international system, is what we may call rules-based international system. That's what we're talking about. If you throw away those rules, then there's anarchy. States are kept in check. They want to assert a certain geopolitical prominence precisely because of law. Let me give an example, which I think perhaps it might have been in the ambassador's mind. Russia grabbed the Crimea, isn't it?
Yes.
Some would say that's a geopolitical reality. Russia didn't bother about the niceties of law. And so in that instance, it trumped law. But Russia is facing problems precisely because Russia violated the law. It should not have. That is the point. Russia itself knows very well that what it did was illegal. And much of the problem it's having in the Western powers is because of that. The world has said the boundaries as they are must be respected. If you don't respect state boundaries, you go around grabbing territory from perceived weak states, neighboring states. Where shall we end? I've looked at this problem and getting back to our own situation. If we allow a situation like to prevail, my goodness, Nigeria, for example, would have a right to take all the northern part of French Cameroon, the Adamawa, the far north, and whatever thing it is, because all of that area was part of the Sokoto Caliphate. And they were stopped from proceeding south because of the Germans who were coming from the coast and proceeding, and so they were stopped. But they had all of that under their control. So Nigeria might well claim all of that. Do you know where that will land us? Big trouble. I could multiply examples where a thing like that is not permissible. But I think the first thing, of course, we need to do is ask ourselves, what is geopolitics? Because the ambassador referred to geopolitics. Now, geopolitics is simply the effect of geographic factors on politics, especially international politics. Like reading a book by Robert Kaplan, he calls it The Revenge of Geography. Everything is about geography. And if you look at it, America is a great power in part because of its geographical location. It commands the Pacific Sea on that side, and it commands the Atlantic on this side here. What made Britain a great power and a great sea power? Why? Because at that time, Britain included Ireland. And so the North Atlantic, all of that side, was British. And the North Sea, even up to the Channel, remained British. And the British were able to impose themselves on the English Channel. So they're able to command because of that position. Look at a country like China. It's a great power. Why? Not only because it is large in population, it has a great expanse of land from all geographical features you can have, from desert to forest, right down to the sea, a huge sea front where they have. Look at Pakistan, in control of vast mountainous areas. So you look at even India. So every country is affected in terms of its politics, especially international politics, by its geography. And that is what is very, very important. I tell you, I asked a question in my Department of Foreign Affairs, my people there. I say, you guys, can you tell me the certain geographical things that will make Amazonia competitive, or that will make Amazonia in a situation where it has an advantage or disadvantage? I threw them that question. Because you see, our people too do not think very much. They don't think. If you ask people what is the advantage of Amazonia, everybody just jumps and says, we have oil. That is really nothing, frankly. It's really nothing. Equatorial Guinea down there has a lot of oil, which Americans are tapping. So I said, no, you guys must think much more seriously. Think geography. And when I told them, I said, you know what? I'll give you just one example. Look at the northwest of Amazonia. It shares a common boundary with who? With the Muslim northern Nigeria. The northeast of Amazonia shares a boundary with the Muslim north of French Cameroon. There are implications of this, security implications as well in all of this. And that is what drives countries to want to intervene in other places. So when you hear countries talking about they want to fight terrorism, Boko Haram, and so on and so forth, it has implications for us as well, because we are essentially a Christian nation, hemmed in by all of this. You know, that serves to us as a disadvantage. So there are many things. So geopolitics is the effect of geographical factors of politics, especially international politics. And the combination of geographical and political factors affecting a country in a particular area. So every country is affected by a combination of geographical and political factors. Every country. So that's what geopolitics is all about. And this geopolitics will provide a link between geography and strategy. Geography and strategy. Every country, Britain, for example, has been an imperial power. It calls it a sea power. And all of Britain's strategy, what has been doing, what has guided the fact that it's a power, has been the fact of its geographical situation, the way it is located. And this affects international politics. That's why Britain prides itself as a sea power. And that leads to the question of geostrategy, which is the geographical direction of a state foreign policy. That's what the strategy is all about. And you can see from Britain, from America, projecting power. America is projecting power right back there. You can see them. They have their ships not too far away from China, not far away from Japan, Korea, and so on and so forth. Projecting power. The geography of America, leads you to do all of those things. Don't forget that America is controlling Guam. Guam, if you know what Guam is, not too far from this. So that's what it is. And that's why I said what Ambassador Nash said has limited application. It can only apply in certain situations. First of all, geopolitics does not apply domestically within a country. It doesn't come in there that it will trump anything. No, it doesn't. So we're only looking at international system, international law, the world at large. But the world at large must be governed by law. And that's what the UN Charter is talking about. You don't misbehave. So, of course, I do not deny the fact that the big powers sometimes, guided by their own interests, may often sometimes try to trample afoot international law, driven by their own self-interest, driven by the geopolitical strategies, things they want to do. That happens. But as I say, that is exceptional. And when it does happen, the big powers of these countries concerned know that they are violating international law.
No, I absolutely I do understand that part. But what I want to get some clarity from is that when Ambassador Nash talks about geopolitics, what I'm thinking, when you sit in the West, Prof, and people talk about geopolitics, they not only look at the geography, they look at the resources in that geography. And what I interpreted, what he's saying is that when that comes into play, people who have the power to dominate that area, they will dominate it by force, because and you can argue that force is the end of argument, is the ultimate argument. And they are saying, well, we're not going to end disagreements by looking at the law to resolve it. We're going to turn to force to resolve it. And so people who have that force would say force is just an extension of the argument and a process of decision making. Because you emphasize a lot about the geography, but I think when they talk about geopolitics, they're talking at the geography, the resources that are there that they want. And so they're saying we will not allow law to prevent us from getting those resources.
Okay. The geography, of course, includes resources.
Yes.
When you talk about the sea, you are talking about the sea power. The sea power includes the resources in the sea. That is a big debate that went on the law of the sea. And if you know the story, how many countries, the Western powers were eager to contain coastal states just to a 12-mile territorial limit. And countries said, no, we cannot. And eventually, along this country, it's okay, fine. You can take 24, and then later on, they say, okay, you have 200 miles. An exclusive economic zone, you can have that, and so on. But the reality of it is that, especially third world country, when you claim that legally, but there's little you can do, because when you claim that extensive sea limit, The developed countries that are claiming that because they have the resources that they could go under the sea, right down to the floor of the sea, and tap whatever resources is there and get them out. But it is precisely because of that at the law of the sea they agreed to establish a seabed authority. And that seabed authority is to prevent the appropriation of the undersea resources out there for the more powerful states that can actually access them. Mm-hmm. Now, if the point about all the resources, if we allow that thing about power and resources to go, what then prevents a country with the necessary power to come right at our doorsteps and get whatever they want? There'll be nothing. Let me take an example. Nigeria, for example, could now move right into Amazonia and get whatever resource they come, or whatever thing it is, because they consider themselves the bigger power, that they can do whatever they want to do. And we say, well, there's nothing we can do because geopolitics now trumps legality. That's why I say that this is a recipe for all kinds of chaos, which we cannot allow. But I do acknowledge the real politics that is involved here. And that's why I say in today's circumstances, there are big powers that do these things. But I also add the caveat that even as they do these things, they know in their hearts of heart that what they're doing is not correct. It's not correct. It's against the law. The law which they themselves took part in fashioning, treaty fashion, or the United Nations. And the interesting thing is about this whole thing is that eventually with time, some of these things that they do are often reversed. You know the story of China, how all the European powers, Americans, the British, and so on, really effectively occupied China, promoted the opium trade, just like they did in America did with Afghanistan, promoting this opium trade and so on and so forth. And when the Chinese tried to raise this and so on, they declared the opium war against the Chinese, the Western powers, because China was very weak at that time. But China beat its time. Now, can any Western power dare try China? They can't. When the British took over Hong Kong, as a matter of geopolitics, we'll grab it and so on. Now the Chinese are daring them. You try, you see. So these things eventually are reversed, again, as a result of the power. And why are the Chinese saying? The Chinese say Hong Kong is our land. It's our territory. You can't come here and grab it. We are saying Ambazona is our territory. You French Cameroon, because you imagine in your head somehow, you have some fancy, you think you are powerful, you can just turn around and grab it overnight and call it that they are part of your territory. I've heard them say so, notre territoire, they say, And when they ask them, when did you get this territory? And how did you get this territory? They're unable to answer. So their response is just like what you are saying. The bully, geopolitics is bully. We are bigger than you, we're stronger than you. I will have it whether you like it or not.
Yeah, no. I think this is a very good place to clarify this. That what La République du Cameroun says is that it was part of a German colony, and as though La République is the inheritance of that German territory. Can you explain a little bit of that?
Those who say those things, I don't think they know the law, or they even have read history and even know geography. They don't. Ambazonia was only accidentally became part of German Cameroon. People forget that what they call Cameroon was a small area which the Douala chiefs gave to the German in 1884, July 1884. Just a small area. That's what Cameroon was. It had nothing to do with place like Yaoundé or Mulundu, whatever, Bamenda or Garouad. It had nothing to do with all of that. Nothing. So that was a small area they had. But the British, after staying in Ambazona from 1833 to 1887, decided in that 1887, in those days, the Western powers like to trade off one territory for another and so on and so forth. And they said, okay, fine, we'll let you take this one to become part. So we became part of German Cameroon more than 3 years after the Germans had proclaimed their territory. Unfortunately for the Germans, at Berlin. They themselves agreed, and this is part of law we're talking about now. The policy changed because until that time, the European colonial policy or colonization policy was that when a state arrived at the coast, they just simply stretched their hand and said, this is my territory. The hinterland belonged to me. First, how far that territory, when you put your hand in stretching it, nobody knew. How deep in the hinterland, nobody knew. That was what was called the sphere of influence and the hinterland theory. And for the Europeans, it caused a lot of problems for them. In the hinterland, they started fighting amongst themselves. As this one said, this is my territory. This one said, this is my territory. And the classic example is the clash between the French and the British at Fashoda, where the British simply just beat out the French, kicked them out. That was it, end of story. So in Berlin in 1884, 85, they decided, no, we have to put order in this business. Otherwise, we'd just be at each other's throat. And they adopted a new policy. What's the policy? A new policy that you cannot claim to have territory until you have effectively occupied it. In law, we call it effectivity, effective occupation. So that is why, even though the British on paper say we're transferring this territory to you, the extent of the territory nobody knew. So now the Germans now have to start the terrible, agonizing task of conquering this territory. How are they conquering? They use their troops, they use their explorers, and they use their missionaries to go into the hinterland and plant the German flag. And that explains why. Look at the place near Douala Boya. They fought for 4 years against the Bakuri. You know that story very well.
Yes.
They fought to get Boya, to get Bakuri this thing. They have had to fight. But that was not the end of it. They had to proceed as they move on towards what we now call Kumba and Manfe, Bamida, and so on. Each place, Libyalem, they were fighting all the way. And the Germans did not have control over what they call Ambazona today. No effective control, as it were, until just at the eve of the First World War. But then, unfortunately for them, they were beaten. And they left. If you ask people who are, say, in what photography learners at that area, some of them have just a nodding, fleeting idea about the German presence. You know, but I mean that people tell they are at the fort. After the fort, what else? Nothing else, you know. So the point is that when French Cameroon talks about the German district, they forget that we became part of German Cameroon only much more later. And in any event, historically, as early as 1914, September 1914, the British had kicked the Germans out of what we now call today Ambazonia, kicked them out and started governing it with Nigeria. And the remaining part, which is French Cameroon, was only until March 1916 that the Germans were defeated and they left. But for purposes of what we are talking, the important point, there are two important points to make, is that after the defeat of Germans, they met in Versailles. At Versailles, the Germans renounced its rights and claim to all its colonial territories. And German Cameroon ceased to exist in fact and in law. There was no such territory anymore. French Cameroon itself became a polity as a result of the forces that were put in motion by the League of Nations as from 1922. So French Cameroon as a polity, as a political entity, can trace it is only to 1922, what it is. And by the same token, Ambazonians as a polity can only be traced to 1922. Of course, there are historical precedents before that, our connection with the British and the Francophone connection with Germans and all of those things and so on. But as a political entity emerging towards statehood, it's traceable only to 1922. No connection whatsoever with us. Complete no connection.
Yeah, which explains
managing brings on and their own decisions. So I can't understand how anybody who thinks, who reads, who understands can ever imagine that French Cameroon became the successor state of German Cameroon, you know.
Yeah, which explains why they speak French and they speak. It's a totally different country in every aspect to Ambazonia. So So we have no history with La République du Cameroon. Absolutely no history.
Let me tell you one little thing, Audrey. Let me tell you one little thing. Do you know, these people make a lot of noise about German Cameroon. The French formally banned in French Cameroon the writing of the word Cameroon using a K. Do you know that?
No, I didn't.
The reason is because it reminds the French of Germans. And remember, the Germans had beaten them in a war in 1870 when Bismarck beat them in that war. So for them, K reminds them of Germany. So they banned that use. The only people who were using K, interestingly, were us. KNDP, KNC, who were the only people? But on that side, there was never, and even the UPC that makes a lot of noise, they never used the K. So what are these people talking about? Their francophonity distinguishes them from us. They're everything French, remain French, because that's what the French had inculcated them. And that's why when the French cut part of that side and gave it to Gabon, gave it to Central African Republic, gave it to Congo, gave it to Chad, and so on, nobody lifted a thumb. Nobody.
Right. You know, in telling that story, Prof, and I really appreciate you for bringing that history to our people. In telling that story, you you made me start thinking that so the British has had Ambazonia twice, and twice they've traded it away in a way that was not really nice.
Correct. And do you know why? Again, the British is amazing. Always the British are motivated by economic considerations. Even though they took Victoria and all of those places, named after their queen and all of that and so on. If you read some of the report, they say, well, the colony was not making much profit. There's nothing in it. And so Britain refused to designate Victoria as a normal staging port for ships that are transiting. So they gave it out to Germans. It happened again. The British were the ones in the First World War. The British were the ones who entered Garoua, who entered Marwa, who came right down to Yaoundé before the French and the Belgians coming from Central Africa and this thing came and met the British there. The British are the ones who bombarded Douala into submission. If the British wanted, they could have claimed the whole of that whole area for their own, or at least would have divided it into two. But you know what the British said? The British said, well, we already have the huge protectorate and colony of Nigeria, which is there. And all we're interested in is just to have secure boundaries in the east for this, our colony. What we've taken will not be of any economic value to us. And that's what happened. The records are there. It's always the British. I don't know, you know. Sometimes you wonder, they send out priests and so on places, but their politics is always very amazing. I discussed it with some people from the Far East, Malaysia, and so on and so forth. And they tell the same story, the experience of the British, the same.
Well, Prof, you know, when I was in my conversation with Thibaut Nash, I did tell him about a class that I took in African history where I understood more clearly why what you're saying happened. Is because East Africa was more temperate, West Africa was lower and had mosquitoes, so East Africa was more preferable to the stronger power Britain. And so they all went to East Africa and the territories. It's amazing that you use the word. I have always since I read that, I looked at Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Gambia as just as more places to stop on their routes around the world. Not because they were really if it were just about territory, they were not interested in West Africa.
They were not. For them, they call this the East African district because of that kind of weather you described. And South Africa, they call them settled colonies because they could settle there. They could settle in Kenya. They could settle in Uganda. They could settle in parts of Zambia. They could settle in Rhodesia. They could settle in South Africa and so on. They could settle there. Climate was okay for them, and so on. And therefore, the British were essentially eager to protect their own because they've settled in those places, and so on. It's the same thing with Namibia. Even up to today, there's a whole part of the eastern part of Nigeria, southeastern part of Nigeria. If you go, you will think they are in Germany. It's amazing. It still has a strong German connection. And the Germans who are there are still there. And the place is just as neat and well organized like you have in Germany.
Wow. So, Prof, I'm really glad that first of all, that you came and to help our people understand this whole geopolitics thing. So what is the takeaway for Ambazonians?
Takeaway is, one, I think by this medium formally inviting our geographers, whom I think have been a bit complacent and sitting back. There is a lot our people need to know about our territory. We don't. Our geographers have to come into the show. You remember in those days, there was one Mr. Ngwa, who was writing the geography for West Cameroon. I don't know whether he wrote several books. The books were being used in secondary schools in West Cameroon. Unfortunately, when 72 came, of course, all of that stopped and so on. If you ask any Ambazonian now, do you know the rivers we have, where they rise and where they fall? Do you know the hills we have, the height of these hills, the plains and so on? They don't. All of these things have implications. I'll give you just one example. The other I can multiply. Are you aware that the drainage pattern, all the rivers arise from Ambazonia and flow down, some of them into French Cameroon, and that therefore the tapping of hydroelectricity hinges essentially on this river drainage pattern that comes from Ambazonia. That has implication, isn't it?
Yes.
Serious implication, which means if you did something, that's it, they're in big trouble. They are in big trouble. You can say exactly the same thing as in Mungu, the Mungu River, that flows down into the sea. You notice that in Mungu there, they brought a Chinese company that is tapping water from the Mungu, and that's the water which goes down to Douala. Without that one, Douala will have no water, no water system. Because of that, that has implications. The fact of how that Mungu. Do you know that the soil of Ambazonia, just take Victoria alone, what people call seawall and volcanic ash, that is what they've used in building that seafront in Douala, in Bonaberi. They developed all of that. We're able to tar the streets and so on. Even the sun, the Mungu, is coming from the Mungu, when many people don't realize, is entirely in our territory, not in French Cameroon territory. Don't mind if you go traveling, you see the billboard, they put it at a river, and they say, welcome to what they call Southwest. No, the boundary is further to Bekokode.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Yes, it is there. So there are a lot of geography. The more you think about it, it's amazing. It's really, really amazing. And somehow I've often thought, I say, that may be why this little territory here is giving a lot of headache to many people, and they don't want to let go because they know what the implications are. They know. The French certainly know. They've done their homework, they know. And that's why they're pushing for this and telling French Cameroon, if you let this territory go, well, you might just say goodbye. So there are a lot of implications. So I'm inviting our people, especially our geographers, to get involved in all of these things. So there are a few things we need to sort out in terms of geopolitics, which we need to sort out. I'm also inviting our historians not to shy away from coming, digging deep, and to stop, because either up to now, what people call history, I've seen some people call themselves historians, but what actually they're doing is they're narrating political evolution. That's not just history. They will tell you, and of course their history starts from Germans. The Germans came in 1884. And then after that, UPC, all they were fighting for independence. After independence, KNDP was doing this. Then Hijo was doing this and so on. After that, we got independence. That is, you are just recounting events, a chronology of events. That is not just history. History is a whole composite thing that is not limited to just the politics of it, but also the economic of it, the social political context of it. I'm waiting to see our historian write anything about the role of the series of example it plays in the evolution of our territory. I have not seen anything yet in that respect. So our historians forget about economics. They forget about the social history. Why? I don't know. Maybe that is a difficult area for them to go. The easy one is to go and recount events that have happened from one thing to another, one thing to independence and so on and so forth. So I'm inviting them to get much more serious. Now that our project is to have an independent country of ours, our story must be consistent. It must be deep. So I'm inviting our historians now to get implicated in this stuff. I'm inviting our lawyers also. Our lawyers. Sometimes I get disappointed that when our lawyers often limit themselves and they think that the only thing about law is getting wig and gown and going to court. No, it's much more than that. In fact, the trend you find now in modern countries is for lawyers not to go to court that often. We encourage what we call settlement out of court. Yes. So court thing, frankly, perhaps had the glamour at one time, but now not really very interesting. But our lawyers should not just concentrate their effort on that. You concentrate on building Ambazonia, constitutional development, legal development, judicial development, and so on, which I don't see our lawyers talking about even, which is a shame. So I'm inviting them now to be able to take that seriously into account. We're not going to have a country. We don't have things loose, hanging here. We're not able to do those things. And finally, I'm inviting our people generally, civil society, for them to rise up. One of the things I admire in this country where I am is that they have a very, very strong civil society, very strong. And when they take an issue, government, you don't mess around with them. When they take, and they do their research on any issue they take up, they do their research thorough. And I want to see that in the future ambassador, because if you don't have a strong civil society, that's the recipe for allowing the government to become a dictatorship and to treat people very, very shabbily. Civil society calls the government into order. And I want to see that happening. Don't just create it because you want to create an NGO and make no. It must be focused on this area, on this area, on this area. Those are the 4 areas I think I want to invite our people to start thinking about seriously now.
Well, I'm going to add another one, and that's to our fighters, because immediately Timo Nash talked about geopolitics preempting legality. I thought that is pulling the rug under the reason why we fight. But the more I thought about it, it became important that our fighters should know that we should not depend on any arguments on any moral or legal or traditional or historical rights to our land, but that we will get our land by projecting force. And force sometimes, just the same as a heart attack can kill somebody, a headache or just jigger in your foot can make life uncomfortable to a point where you give up.
That's right.
I want you to add your voice to that to our fighters.
Totally. In all liberation struggles, the law itself has never, by itself, been decisive. The law has a subordinate role to play. The law, as I see it, supports the revolutionary effort and gives it substance. So those who are fighting will say, yes, we're using force, but we're using force for legal reasons. This is where we're standing on legal point. And so that force, our fighters must know that is what ultimately is going to turn the table around. And at that table, we'll be saying, well, even from the legal point of view, this is it. You don't have any legal way to stand up. Tell the enemy that. The force, that is it. And they must always bear in mind that in all liberation struggles, those who struggling are always then put it on a weaker foot. All liberation struggles. The enemy is always the stronger opponent. And that's why the enemy even declares war anyway, in the false hope that it is going to win. Always. It's always like that. But our resilience, and because we are fighting a good cause, and precisely because we know we have the law on our side as we fight on, the enemy hasn't got. The enemy hasn't got the law on his side. The enemy is dependent simply on pure brute force and the fact that it is a bigger entity and therefore can impose its will. Unfortunately, the world history has shown it has never worked that way. Eventually, the enemy always collapses. Those of the enemies that have been clever, they've given up quite early, so as to cause less trouble. Because in the Ambazonian context, no one doubts that Ambazonia is going to emerge victorious. What is doubtful is when this victory is going to come. For that, no one can predict. On the side of the enemy, that's why I said clever enemies always give up the fight quite early to mitigate the damages. Because what is going to happen after this fight? I'm afraid French Cameroon, the bad thing is that those who are causing all the trouble on their side now will not be there at that time. You know, what is going to happen? They will spend the next 50 or 200 years paying reparation. And they will have to bear other consequences born out of geopolitics. It's going to happen. I wish they would have asked other countries to tell them, but stupid pride would prevent them, doesn't allow them to do that. So later on that they will realize that, well, what I'm doing so far, the way they had cut their losses very early and they moved on with their lives.
Absolutely. And you know, I want you to, just before we go, sir, I want you to see if you agree with me, and then I want to hear what you say about it. I think 2022 is a new beginning for the Ambazonian struggle, because it seems to me, just look at the field, it seems to me that there's been a lot of learning, a lot of perfection of skills at every level, and the forces that we have blamed for not working together, those forces seem to be imploding right now. So I'm looking at this 2022 as a year of great advances. So when you were talking about when it will end, I see this year as being the beginning to an end. Tell me what you think.
Yes, I've heard that. I don't want to call it prophecy or prediction yet. I've heard people say that. But I don't want to raise unnecessary hope by saying that, oh yes, but there's no doubt that this year would be a turning point in this struggle. I mean, it will be a decisive year in many respects. I do know that the enemy is doing all it can, is preparing and working very hard, knowing what is lying ahead of them. And I also know that we have a huge challenge, because if we're just fighting just French Cameroon, that would have been an easy pick. We would have done what we know what to do. But we're fighting a combination of forces, not just French Cameroon, we're fighting France, fighting Israel, and even fighting the British in all of this. Supported somehow, all of them, also some ways, by China. So here is a small little country fighting all of these powers of these countries. But in these kind of struggles, eventually realism sets in. After 4 or 5 years of struggle, people start asking questions. What really are we fighting for? And for how long do we keep on fighting? Do we really believe that we can put a rope around the neck of Ambazonian and tie them to French Cameroon and they will just sit quiet? We're hoping that we can tie a rope around the neck and postpone the fight to another, maybe another 2, 3, 4 years when the thing will resurrect again and so on. So people begin to ask these hard questions. Even their own soldiers themselves, they will ask. So many of us have died. Let me say, even if it's just 100 of them have died in the past 4 years. But to ask, those lives are lost exactly for what? We've been fighting a people who in the beginning had no skills at all. Not one single rifle, not one. But as the days have been going on, by force of learning on the ground, by force of practical discipline, they are perfecting themselves. Give these people another 2, 3, 4 years' time, you don't know what they will become. Whereas the enemy started from high up there, already have big army, soldiers, well trained, and so on and so forth. So they can only be coming down, they can't be going upwards. But whereas their fighters are moving up, moving up, moving up, moving up. What will happen if the next 3, 4 years' time, this thing doesn't stop? What will happen? Someone said something which I laughed, but let me just share it with you. He said, look, French Cameroon should be very careful. There may come a time when we do exactly like what the Israelis did when they captured the Golan Heights and held it. We may take over the entire West and littoral or parts of it and hold it and refuse to give it and say they are not part of French Cameroon. That would be the day. That would be the day. And this is not far-fetched. It's not far-fetched. It's not far-fetched. So at some point, people will start thinking very hard on these questions. And at that point, they might say, look, as I say, people say in America, they will better cut our losses and move ahead, and so on.
Well, I did ask you if you felt safe going to La République. I didn't mean you in particular. It was a question that I asked because a lot of our people, La République used to send our people out, did not give opportunities, so thousands, even millions left the territory and they're outside right now. Our people also back home never used to fight. But many have picked up their guns and they know that their survival depends on the liberation of Ambazonia. And so when I asked you that question, I was trying to reference that there are people now who are entrenched in the liberation of Ambazonia that were not there in the past. Nobody was entrenched. But right now, you can bet that No PT and all the other boys who are very famous on the ground, who have a lot of La République blood in their hands, that they are not going to rest, and their offsprings in generations to come will not rest until La République leaves. So I'm just supporting what you're saying, that mighty La République has been coming down. Obviously, they have they don't have any answer to some of the weapons that these fighters on the ground have developed.
Yeah, no, you're very right. I mean, you see, any military strategist will tell you, you may have all the kind of sophisticated weapons you have, but if it is not adapted to the warfare you're facing, they're useless. Absolutely useless. French Cameroon may have artillery pieces, may take. Well, they will take them to where? You are not facing an enemy, say in the desert, where you have your tanks, you place your tanks, you play shooting at this. It doesn't. That's none. So even if they had an air force which they don't have, it would be completely useless. An air force without a ground force is absolutely useless. And so therefore, when they talk about, we are going to deploy this, the nature of the warfare going on there, there's very little they can do about it. Very little they can do about it, So I agree with you. I mean, going back, The last time I went to French Cameroon, I can't remember when, more than many years back. I can't remember. So that the names of some of the places, even a place like Yaoundé, where I thought for life, well, when you call the name, I can't figure out the place in my mind where that direction is. So that shows you that I'd cut off the umbilical cord a long time ago with that place. I mean, I don't identify myself with the place, and I don't think there's any genuine link that I have, or most ambassadors have, with that country. I've told people when I debated with somebody on this issue, they say, "Oh, but you carry French Cameroon passport around." I said, "Of course I do. As part of my human right, they are obliged under international law to issue me a travel document as part of to facilitate my freedom of movement. If they fail to do that, they'll be violating my rights. And if they want to issue, well, let my country free. My country issue me a passport in the next 24 hours, no problem." So the issue of a passport, which for me is not a genuine, for me it's just a document of convenience. It's like a ship flying a flag of convenience, but that's really not the country whose flag it is flying. So exactly the same thing, and I suppose most ambassadors themselves will still use that document. That's what happens. The good news is that many of them gradually are giving away that document. One thing has no use. It's one of the weakest passports you can ever have in the world. One of the weakest. I've tried to establish that and so on. So there's no advantage to be gained by that. But it's just that it facilitates movement from place to place until such a time as they leave my territory, my country. Then, of course, we have a passport. No, the point to make is very, very potent, and which French Cameroon ignores at its own peril. This is a generational thing. You've murdered people. You've assassinated people. Right down to babies and disabled people. And then you think, someday can just come on there and say, "Oh, no, well, let's forget about it and get on like that." Oh, no, it won't happen that way. The children growing up now are seeing what is happening. They're positioning themselves. Those are brought down within the country and so on and so forth. So what French Cameroon doesn't know is, if they don't leave, they are preparing a situation of endless conflict. Unfortunately, this one's causing this will not be there at that time. The DS and rest would have been gone. She asked herself, why would an old man like that cause problem for you and leave you behind to do that? Why he himself is gone? His family is in safety.
La Republique really doesn't even have any more targets to shoot in Amazonia. They've burned all the villages they could burn. They've dispersed the population. Mm-hmm. I'm looking at it, I'm like, what else is left? So they have really, so the war is now Ambazonians' war to get them out. And I have been seeing the Ambazonians improve. I have never thought about what you speculated about taking their territory and holding it. But I can tell you that given time, it may actually be a reality if this continues, because my understanding is that even La Republique's military, when they hear that the Ambazonians or the Ambas are coming, they run away. I see the emboldenment of the boys on the ground. I see the ferocity in which they fight. I see the training they have acquired. You can tell in their posture, in their messages, and in their performance. And it's a very, I think Ambazonia has never been in a better place since the Germans came in than where they are today.
Correct.
I really appreciate you joining us, Prof. Every time we engage you, it's a whole lesson, and I appreciate a lot of the information you're given today. You connected a lot of missing. You brought in a lot of connections to parts of the history that I didn't know, and then you confirmed some of what I was only speculating. So I really thank you for joining us on this show. Thank you.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is mine.